Expelled for being poor, he said, "I'll return for you," to the maid's daughter. He appeared as boss. The autumn rain fell in sheets across the manicured grounds of Ashford Preparatory Academy, transforming the cobblestone pathways into rivers of reflected lamplight. Daniel Reyes stood at the entrance of the administration building, his scholarship blazer soaked through, his hands trembling not from cold, but from the letter clutched between his fingers. The words, blurred as water droplets, landed on the paper, but he had already memorized every syllable, every carefully constructed phrase, designed to erase him from this place he had worked so hard to belong. Effective immediately, your financial assistance has been terminated due to budgetary restructuring. We thank you for your time at Ashford and wish you success in your future endeavors. 18 years old, 3 months from graduation, top of his class in mathematics, physics, and computer science. None of it mattered. The Board of Trustees had decided that scholarship students were a liability, that the Academy's prestigious reputation required a certain financial uniformity among its student body. Daniel had heard the whispers in hallways, the casual cruelty of classmates who had never known what it meant to count pennies or skip meals. He had ignored them, focused on his studies, believed that excellence would be enough. He had been naive. The door behind him opened, and he heard footsteps approaching, measured, deliberate, carrying the weight of authority. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Headmaster William Crawford had been watching him since the moment Daniel arrived at Ashford 4 years ago, had made it clear through countless small humiliations that a boy from the projects didn't belong among the children of senators and CEOs. "The campus security will escort you to your dormitory to collect your belongings," Crawford said, his voice carrying that particular tone of manufactured sympathy that powerful men use when destroying lives they consider insignificant. "Your mother has already been informed. I believe she's waiting at the service entrance." His mother. Maria Reyes had spent 15 years cleaning the homes of wealthy families, had taken a position in Ashford's housekeeping staff, specifically because it came with a tuition discount for her son. She had scrubbed floors and washed windows and smiled through condescension because she believed education was the door to a better life. Now she was waiting at the service entrance like cargo to be collected. Daniel turned slowly, rain streaming down his face, and met Crawford's eyes. The headmaster stood beneath the portico, perfectly dry, his silver hair immaculate, his expression carrying the faintest hint of satisfaction. "You will regret this," Daniel said, his voice steady despite everything crumbling inside him. "Not today, not tomorrow. But someday you will remember this moment and understand exactly what you threw away." Crawford's smile didn't waver. "Bold words from a boy who cannot even afford his own textbooks. I suggest you focus that energy on finding employment, Mr. Reyes. Perhaps your mother can teach you how to properly fold hospital corners." Something hardened in Daniel's chest. Not rage, though rage was there, burning beneath the surface. Something colder. Something that would sustain him through the years ahead. Fuel him when exhaustion demanded surrender. Remind him of exactly why he had to succeed. He walked past Crawford without another word, descending the stone steps into the rain, letting the water wash away the last traces of the boy who had believed in meritocracy and fair chances. That boy was gone now. In his place stood something new, something forged in humiliation and sharpened by betrayal. The service entrance was around the back of the main building, near the kitchens where his mother had often worked late preparing banquets for parents' weekends and alumni gatherings. Daniel found her there, standing beneath a narrow awning, her housekeeping uniform still bearing the Academy's crest, the same crest that had just expelled her son. "Mijo," she whispered, and that single word contained everything. Pride that had turned to ash, dreams that had evaporated like morning mist, the particular grief of a mother watching her child's future collapse. Daniel embraced her, feeling how thin she had become, how her shoulders carried, the weight of years spent believing hard work would be rewarded. "It's going to be okay, Mama, I promise. This isn't the end." "They can't do this. Your grades, your test scores, you're better than any of them. They can do whatever they want. That's what power means in this country. Daniel pulled back, holding her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. But it won't always be this way. I'm going to build something they can't ignore. I'm going to make them remember my name. Maria's eyes searched his face, looking for the child she had raised, the gentle boy who used to bring home stray cats and share his lunch with classmates who forgot theirs. She found traces of him still, buried beneath new determination, but changed, hardened. Don't let them turn you into something you're not, she said softly. Success means nothing if you lose yourself to get it. I won't lose myself. I'll become exactly who I need to be. Movement at the corner of the building caught his attention. Flash of blonde hair, the flutter of an academy skirt, the unmistakable silhouette of someone who shouldn't be anywhere near the service entrance. Daniel's heart constricted as Victoria Crawford stepped into the light. She was the headmaster's daughter, but she had never acted like it. For 3 years, Victoria had been Daniel's study partner, his debate opponent, his secret confidant during late nights in the library when neither of them could sleep. She had defended him against classmates who mocked his second-hand clothes, had shared her notes when his textbooks were accidentally destroyed, had looked at him like he was someone worth knowing, rather than a charity case to be tolerated. She was also the girl he had fallen in love with, though he had never been foolish enough to tell her. Daniel. Her voice cracked on his name. She was crying, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks, her carefully applied makeup running in dark streams. I just found out. My father. I didn't know he was going to do this. I swear I didn't know. Victoria, you shouldn't be here. Daniel glanced at the windows above them, imagining Crawford watching, calculating how to use this moment against his own daughter. If your father sees you, I don't care what he sees. She crossed the distance between them, stopping just short of touching him, her hands clenching at her sides, as if physical contact might break something irreparable. This is wrong. What he's doing is wrong, and I told him so. Told him that you're the most brilliant person at this school, that expelling you is a mistake he'll regret. And what did he say? Victoria's jaw tightened. He said I was too young to understand the importance of institutional integrity. He said that that students from certain backgrounds create challenges for community cohesion. People like me, Daniel thought. People who clean his house and serve his dinner and make his life comfortable in ways he'll never acknowledge. Go. Back inside, Victoria. Protect yourself. What happens to me isn't worth destroying your relationship with your father. My relationship with my father died the moment he showed me who he really is. Victoria finally reached out, her fingers closing around his wrist with desperate strength. Run away with me, tonight. We can go somewhere they'll never find us. Start over. Build something together. Victoria. Daniel covered her hand with his own, memorizing the softness of her skin, the racing pulse beneath her wrist. I can't run away. I can't spend my life hiding from people like your father. And I can't drag you into poverty and uncertainty, because I'm angry. But I love you. The words escaped her like a confession, trembling and raw and utterly sincere. I've loved you since junior year when you corrected my calculus proof in front of the whole class and then apologized for being right. I've loved you through every study session and every debate and every moment you pretended not to notice me watching you. Daniel closed his eyes, letting her words wash over him like the rain. In another world, in a just world, this declaration would be the beginning of something beautiful. But they didn't live in that world. They lived in a world where a headmaster could destroy a student's future with a single signature, where love between classes was permitted only in directions that elevated rather than diminished. I love you too, he said quietly. That's why I have to let you go. No? Listen to me. He opened his eyes, holding her gaze with an intensity that silenced her protest. I'm going to leave tonight with nothing but my mother and whatever we can carry. I'm going to spend years rebuilding from zero, working jobs that will exhaust me, teaching myself things your father's money would have paid professors to explain. It's going to be hard and ugly and lonely, and I will not ask you to share that burden. I'm not asking. I'm offering. And I'm refusing. Daniel released her hand, stepping back, creating distance that felt like miles. Go back to your life, Victoria. Finish your senior year. Go to whatever Ivy League school your father has already purchased your admission to. Be happy. I won't be happy without you. Yes, you will, eventually. Happiness is more resilient than we give it credit for. Daniel turned toward his mother, who had been watching this exchange with an expression of profound sadness. But I want you to know something. I want you to remember it when years have passed and this night feels like a dream. Victoria's tears fell faster, but she didn't look away. What? I'll come back. The words carried the weight of a vow, solid as stone, unbreakable as steel. I don't know when, I don't know how, but I will come back to this place, and I will be something your father cannot dismiss or ignore. I will be something that makes him understand exactly what he threw away. Daniel. Wait for me. He hadn't planned to. Say it. Knew it was selfish and possibly cruel, but the words escaped anyway. If you can. If you want to. Wait for me. Victoria's hand rose to her heart, pressing against her chest as if holding something precious in place. How long? As long as it takes. Then I'll wait. Her voice was steady now, her tears still falling but her resolve crystallizing. I'll wait as long as it takes, Daniel Reyes. And when you come back, I'll be here. He wanted to kiss her. The desire was overwhelming, almost physical in its intensity. But he knew that if he kissed her now, he might never find the strength to walk away. So instead, he committed every detail of this moment to memory, the way rain clung to her eyelashes, the particular shade of blue in her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw, and turned away. His mother was already walking toward the parking lot, where an ancient sedan waited to carry them away from everything they had built over 4 years. Daniel followed her, his spine straight, his steps measured, refusing to look back at the girl standing in the rain. Behind him, he heard Victoria call his name one final time. He heard the grief in her voice, the desperate hope, the beginning of a wait that might last years or forever. He didn't turn around. Some promises required everything you had. Some promises demanded that you become someone capable of keeping them. Daniel Reyes stepped into the rain and walked away from Ashford Preparatory Academy, carrying nothing but his mother's hand in his and a vow that burned like fire in his chest. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel, because this story is about to show you what happens when someone with nothing decides to become everything their enemies feared. 12 years can transform a landscape beyond recognition. Cities rise where fields once stood. Technologies emerge that reshape how humanity lives and communicates. Children become adults, idealists become pragmatists, and promises made in the rain either wither into forgotten dreams or grow into forces that alter the world. Daniel Reyes had chosen growth. The corner office on the 52nd floor of the Apex building offered a panoramic view of Manhattan's skyline, a kingdom of glass and steel that Daniel had spent a decade learning to navigate. Below, the city pulsed with its eternal energy, traders rushing to close deals, tourists photographing landmarks, dreamers arriving with suitcases full of hope. Daniel had been one of those dreamers once. Now he was something else entirely. At 30 years old, he was the youngest CEO in the history of Meridian Capital, a private equity firm that had grown from a startup in his mother's apartment to a financial powerhouse managing over $12 billion in assets. His face had appeared on the covers of Forbes and Bloomberg Businessweek. His name was whispered in boardrooms across the country, sometimes with admiration, often with fear. The fear was intentional. Daniel had learned early that in the world of high finance, respect was earned through results and maintained through reputation. He had cultivated an image of calculated precision, never making a move without purpose, never showing weakness, never forgetting a debt or a grudge, especially not a grudge. His assistant, Rachel, appeared in the doorway with a tablet in her hands and the expression that suggested complicated news. The acquisition team has completed their analysis. The Ashford Educational Trust is vulnerable. Their endowment has underperformed for 7 consecutive years. Their enrollment is declining. and their largest donor just withdrew pledged support due to a personal disagreement with the headmaster. Daniel didn't smile, but something shifted in his eyes, a predator catching the scent of wounded prey. And the headmaster? Is he still William Crawford? Retired 2 years ago, but his daughter took over administrative control when the previous head resigned. Victoria. Crawford has been running Ashford for 18 months. Rachel paused, clearly wondering about the history her boss had never shared. The Trust's board is desperate for capital injection. They've already rejected 3 acquisition offers because they couldn't guarantee the school's independence. They won't reject mine. Daniel turned to look out the window, his reflection ghosting against the glass. 12 years older, infinitely harder, but still carrying the eyes of the boy who had stood in the rain, making promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Prepare the preliminary offer, generous enough to seem benevolent, structured in a way that gives us operational control within 18 months. And if they ask about your connection to the school, they won't ask. People in desperate situations rarely question the credentials of their saviors. Daniel's hand rose to touch the glass, fingers spreading against the cold surface as if he could grasp the city itself. But if they do, tell them the truth. Tell them I'm an alumnus who believes in second chances. After Rachel left, Daniel allowed himself a moment of reflection, a luxury he rarely indulged. The path from that rainy night to this corner office had been longer and harder than he had imagined possible. Community college while working 2 jobs. A scholarship to NYU earned through test scores that seemed impossible for someone without prep school advantages. An MBA from Wharton, funded by student loans that had taken years to repay. And through it all, the memory of Victoria Crawford standing in the rain, promising to wait. He had not contacted her. The decision had been deliberate, even cruel in its execution. Daniel knew that reaching out during his years of struggle would have been a form of surrender, an admission that he needed something he couldn't provide for himself. He had built his empire in silence, watching her from a distance through social media and society pages, learning that she had graduated from Yale, had worked briefly in educational administration, had returned to Ashford when her father's health began to decline. She had never married. He had checked, frequently. The phone on his desk buzzed with a message from his mother, who lived now in a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights that Daniel had purchased for her 5 years ago. She still insisted on cooking her own meals and doing her own laundry, still attended Mass every Sunday, still worried about her son in ways that made Daniel feel simultaneously cherished and guilty. "Mijo, are you coming for dinner tonight? I'm making your favorite." Daniel typed back a quick confirmation, then turned his attention to the documents Rachel had left on his desk. The Ashford acquisition would require careful orchestration, not because the financial details were complex, but because the emotional stakes were higher than any deal he had ever negotiated. He was about to buy the institution that had expelled him. He was about to become the boss of the woman he had never stopped loving. The question was whether Victoria Crawford would see this as fulfillment of his promise or an act of revenge against her family's legacy. Daniel suspected the answer would determine whether the next chapter of his life would be triumph or tragedy. The board meeting took place in Ashford's historic library, a room that had always reminded Daniel of a cathedral devoted to knowledge rather than divinity. 12 years ago, he had spent countless hours among these mahogany shelves, pulling Latin texts and scientific journals that most students ignored, building the foundation of an education that his expulsion could not erase. Now he sat at the head of the table where those decisions had been made, facing a row of nervous trustees who had no idea that the man about to save their institution was the boy they had once discarded. "Mr. Reyes, your offer is certainly generous." The board chairman, a retired judge named Harrison, shuffled papers with hands that trembled slightly. "But the board has concerns about operational independence. Ashford has maintained its character for over a century. We cannot allow that to be diluted by corporate interests." "I have no interest in diluting Ashford's character." Daniel's voice carried the calm authority of someone who had long since learned that power spoke softly. "I want to restore it." The Academy's reputation was built on academic excellence and the promise that merit, not Merely money determined success. That promise has been compromised over the years. Compromised how? Shall I be specific? Daniel opened the folder before him, though he had memorized every detail. In the past decade, Ashford has expelled 14 scholarship students, citing behavioral issues or academic underperformance. 12 of those students went on to graduate with honors from public schools and are now successful professionals. The remaining 2 faced circumstances that any reasonable institution would have accommodated. The trustees exchanged uncomfortable glances. These were details they preferred to keep buried. "I'm proposing a new direction," Daniel continued. "A full scholarship program funded by my personal foundation. Enhanced financial aid for middle-income families. Academic support services that ensure every student has the resources to succeed, regardless of their parents' bank balances." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Ashford will become what it always claimed to be, a school where excellence is the only currency that matters. And what do you gain from this arrangement? The satisfaction of keeping a promise I made a long time ago." Before anyone could respond, the library doors opened, and Victoria Crawford walked in. Time had been kind to her, though Daniel suspected time had little to do with it. She had grown into her beauty rather than faded from it, her features sharpening with maturity, her bearing carrying the confident grace of someone who had found her purpose. She wore a simple navy dress, professional but not severe, and her blonde hair was pulled back in a style that reminded Daniel painfully of the girl she had once been. Her eyes found his across the room, and he watched recognition dawn, first confusion, then disbelief, then something more complex that he couldn't quite identify. "I apologize for my lateness," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the storm clearly raging behind her. Composure. There was an issue with the junior dormitory that required immediate attention. She took her seat at the opposite end of the table, directly facing Daniel. "I see you've all met our potential benefactor." "We were just discussing the terms of Mr. Reyes's offer," Harrison said, oblivious to the electricity crackling between the 2 people who hadn't spoken in over a decade. "He has some ambitious plans for scholarship reform." "Does he?" Victoria's eyes never left Daniel's face. "How interesting. Tell me, Mr. Reyes, what inspired this sudden interest in educational philanthropy?" "I believe in investing in potential that others might overlook." Daniel met her gaze without flinching. "Some of the most talented people I've encountered came from circumstances that traditional institutions would have dismissed. I've learned that excellence has nothing to do with zip codes or family income." "That's a noble philosophy. I wonder where you developed it." "Experience is an effective teacher. Sometimes the most painful lessons are the most valuable." The trustees watched this exchange with mounting confusion, sensing undercurrents they couldn't quite interpret. Harrison cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should review the specific terms of the proposal." "Before we do," Victoria interrupted, "I'd like to speak with Mr. Reyes privately. Administrative matters require clarification." Daniel inclined his head. "Of course. I'm happy to address any concerns." They left the library together, walking through corridors that Daniel remembered with perfect clarity despite the years. Here was the corner where he had first spoken to Victoria, nervously asking if the seat beside her in the chemistry lab was taken. There was the window overlooking the courtyard where they had eaten lunch together, defying the unwritten rules of social segregation. And there, at the end of the hall, was the door to the administrative office, where his expulsion had been finalized. Victoria led him to a small conference room and closed the door behind them with more force than necessary. 12 years. Her voice was quiet but carried the weight of accumulated emotion. 12 years, Daniel. Not a single letter, not a phone call, not even an email when email became something everyone used. And now you appear as some kind of billionaire savior, buying my school, sitting in meetings like you belong here. I do belong here. I earned the right to be here long before your father decided otherwise. That's not... Victoria pressed her palms against the conference table, steadying herself. Do you have any idea what I went through? I waited, Daniel, for years. I turned down relationships, turned down opportunities, because I believed that the boy who promised to come back actually meant it. I meant every word. Then why didn't you contact me? Why did I have to learn about your success through magazine articles and news reports? Why did I have to wonder for a decade whether you had forgotten me entirely? Daniel moved closer, close enough to see the tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, close enough to smell the subtle perfume that was both familiar and new. Because I needed to become someone worthy of keeping my promise. Because showing up halfway through my journey, still struggling, still uncertain, that would have been asking you to share burdens I had no right to impose. That wasn't your decision to make. Yes, it was. You were the headmaster's daughter. Choosing me would have cost you everything. Your family, your inheritance, your place in the world you were born into. I couldn't ask you to pay that price for a future I wasn't sure I could deliver. So you delivered it to yourself instead. And now you're here buying the school that expelled you, taking control of the institution my father built. Your father's institution expelled me for being poor. Your father's institution fired my mother and stripped her of her dignity. I'm not here to destroy what he built, Victoria. I'm here to transform it into something better. Victoria's eyes searched his face, looking for the boy she had loved beneath the armor of the man he had become. Is that really why you're here? Or is this revenge dressed up as philanthropy? If I wanted revenge, I would have let Ashford collapse. Your endowment was failing. Your enrollment was dropping. Another 2 years, and you would have been forced to sell to developers who would have turned this campus into luxury condominiums. Daniel's voice softened. I'm here because I made you a promise. And I'm here because somewhere in the past 12 years, I realized that proving myself to people like your father was never the point. Building something better was always the point. A tear escaped down Victoria's cheek, and she wiped it away impatiently. You could have told me. You could have explained all of this, instead of leaving me to wonder. Would you have waited if I had? I waited anyway. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning, with years of separation, with the particular grief of love deferred but not abandoned. Daniel reached out and touched her face, his thumb tracing the path of her tear, and Victoria closed her eyes at the contact. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I'm sorry for the silence and the distance, and all the ways I hurt you while trying to protect you from hurt. I thought I was being noble. I was probably just being afraid. Afraid? Of what? Afraid that if I let myself need you, I would never become strong enough to deserve you. Victoria opened her eyes, and there was something new in them now, a resolve that reminded Daniel of the girl who had stood in the rain defying her father's expectations. And now? Are you strong enough now? I don't know, but I'm tired of being afraid to find out. If you're still watching and you feel this moment in your heart, leave a comment saying, "True love waits, but it also fights." I want to see how many of you understand what these two have survived. The conference door opened without warning, and an elderly man in a wheelchair rolled into the room, pushed by a young nurse who looked apologetic about the interruption. William Crawford had aged badly. The stroke that had forced his retirement had left him partially paralyzed, his silver hair now white and thinning, his once commanding presence diminished to fragility. But his eyes, those pale, calculating eyes that Daniel remembered with perfect clarity, remained sharp. "So," Crawford said, his voice slurred but comprehensible, "the scholarship boy returns. I wondered how long it would take." "Father," Victoria moved protectively between the two men. "You're supposed to be resting. Rest is for people who have nothing left to watch. I heard there was a vulture circling my school. I wanted to see its face." Crawford's gaze never left Daniel. "You've done well for yourself. Better than I expected, I'll admit. But if you think money makes you my equal, money doesn't make me your equal." Daniel's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Money makes me your superior, at least by the metrics you always use to measure worth. But that's not why I'm here." "Then why? Revenge? Humiliation? You want to watch me suffer for what I did to you?" "I want to build something you never could. A school that actually means what it claims, where excellence is recognized regardless of origin, where potential matters more than pedigree." Daniel moved closer to the wheelchair, dropping to one knee so he could meet Crawford's eyes at level. "You taught me a valuable lesson the day you expelled me. You taught me that the people in power rarely deserve that power, and that the only way to change unjust systems is to become powerful enough to rebuild them." Crawford's face contorted with something that might have been rage or grudging respect. "You think you can do better than a century of tradition?" "I know I can, because I understand something you never did." Daniel stood, looking down at the diminished man who had once seemed so terrifyingly powerful. "I understand that institutions exist to serve people, not the other way around. Your precious tradition was a mechanism for maintaining privilege, for ensuring that children like me could never threaten children like yours. And now? Now tradition serves everyone, or it serves no one. The choice is yours." Daniel turned to Victoria. "I'll give the board a week to review the complete proposal. If they accept, I'll begin immediately. If they refuse," he let the silence complete the sentence. Crawford's chair rolled backward as the nurse responded to his agitated gestures. "This isn't over, boy. You may have money, but you'll never have. I have everything I need." Daniel held the door open, a clear dismissal, "including the patience to wait for you to understand that." After they were gone, Victoria stood alone with Daniel in the small conference room, the echoes of the confrontation still resonating in the air. "He'll fight you," she said quietly. "He may be diminished, but he still has influence. Old friends on the board, donors who feel loyalty to his legacy. Let him fight. I've been fighting my entire life. I've gotten very good at winning. And what about us?" Victoria's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "What happens to us in this war you're waging against my father?" Daniel took her hands in his, feeling the slight tremor in her fingers, the racing pulse at her wrists. "That depends on what you want. I came back because I promised I would. I'm buying this school because it's the right thing to do. But I won't ask you to choose between me and your family. I know what that choice costs." "You're wrong." Victoria stepped closer, close enough that he could feel her breath on his face. "You came back, and you changed everything by being here. The choice isn't between you and my family anymore. The choice is between the person I've been waiting to become and the person my father wanted me to be. And who do you want to be? Someone who stands beside you while you build something better. Someone who helps you keep the promise you made that night in the rain." Victoria's hands rose to frame his face, her touch firm and certain. "Someone who stopped waiting the moment you walked into that boardroom." When she kissed him, Daniel felt something shift in his chest. A wall crumbling, a wound finally healing, a promise finally kept. 12 years of separation dissolved in that moment, replaced by the certainty that some connections could survive any distance, any obstacle, any amount of time. They had found their way back to each other. Now the real work could begin. The transformation of Ashford Preparatory Academy began quietly, with small changes that accumulated into revolution. Daniel established an office on campus, not in the administrative wing where Crawford had once ruled, but in the old gardener's cottage at the edge of the grounds, a deliberate choice that signaled his understanding of the school's geography of power. From that modest headquarters, he orchestrated changes that sent tremors through the academy's carefully maintained social order. The scholarship program launched within 3 months, bringing 47 new students from backgrounds that would have disqualified them under the old regime. Academic support centers opened in every dormitory, staffed by tutors who had themselves overcome educational disadvantage. The admissions process was overhauled entirely, with family donations explicitly excluded from consideration. The resistance was immediate and fierce. 3 board members resigned in protest, citing concerns about institutional direction. Several prominent donors withdrew pledged support, writing letters that carefully avoided explicit classism while clearly expressing it. The Parent Association organized meetings where, worried, families voiced questions about whether traditional standards were being maintained. Daniel attended every meeting, every gathering, every confrontation. He listened politely, answered questions thoroughly, and never once lost his composure. When a parent demanded to know why her son should have to compete with students from less rigorous backgrounds, Daniel asked her to define rigor. "Academic performance," she said. "Your son is currently ranked 47th in his class. The scholarship student you're concerned about is ranked 3rd. Which of them would you say demonstrates more academic rigor?" The meetings became shorter after that. Victoria worked beside him through every challenge, her intimate knowledge of the school's culture and politics proving invaluable. She understood which faculty members could be trusted to support the changes, which board members could be persuaded, which donors genuinely cared about education versus those who simply wanted their names. On buildings. Their relationship deepened through shared purpose, late nights reviewing proposals, early mornings walking the campus grounds as dawn light transformed familiar landscapes. They learned each other anew, not as the teenagers they had been, but as the adults they had become. Victoria discovered that Daniel's ruthlessness in business coexisted with profound generosity, that his silences often contained more thought than other people's speeches. Daniel discovered that Victoria's gentle exterior concealed remarkable strength, that she had spent 12 years developing wisdom he had been too focused on success to acquire. "You're different than I expected," she told him one evening as they sat on the cottage porch watching students walk to dinner. "The magazines make you sound like some kind of corporate predator. I am when I need to be. Business rewards effectiveness, not kindness. But you're not like that here. Because here isn't business. Here is something else, entirely." Daniel watched a group of scholarship students laughing together, unconsciously forming the same social bonds that had once been reserved for children of privilege. "Here is about proving that what happened to me doesn't have to happen to anyone else. Is that enough, changing one school? It's a start. Every revolution begins somewhere." He turned to look at her, struck again by how naturally she had become essential to his life. "And I'm learning that success means more when you have someone to share it with." Victoria leaned against his shoulder, her hand finding his. "I missed you every day you were gone, even when I was angry, even when I convinced myself I'd moved on. I missed you. I missed you too. I just couldn't let myself feel it until I was ready. And now? Now I feel everything I was afraid to feel before. And somehow it's not as terrifying as I thought it would be." They sat together as the sun set over the academy grounds, two people who had traveled, through 12 years of separation, to arrive at this moment of simple peace. The challenges ahead remained formidable. Crawford's ongoing interference, the resistance of entrenched interests, the massive undertaking of truly transforming an institution built on exclusion. But for now, in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that they were together. What mattered was that they were building something worth building. What mattered was that the promise had been kept. The crisis came 6 months into Daniel's tenure, as crises always do, suddenly, without warning, threatening to destroy everything that had been carefully constructed. William Crawford, despite his diminished state, had not been idle. Working through allies on the board and connections in the financial industry, he had assembled a coalition of investors who filed a legal challenge to Daniel's acquisition. The lawsuit alleged procedural irregularities in the original board vote, insufficient disclosure of Daniel's personal connection to the school, and conflicts of interest in his reform agenda. The charges were largely baseless, but legal battles operated on their own timeline. A prolonged court fight would drain resources, distract from the Academy's mission, and create uncertainty that could unravel everything Daniel had built. "He timed it perfectly," Victoria said, reviewing the legal documents in Daniel's cottage office. "The spring board meeting is next week. If there's doubt about your position, the members he cultivated will have cover to reverse everything." "There's always doubt. That's not what concerns me." Daniel paced before the window, his mind racing through scenarios and counter-strategies. "What concerns me is that he's willing to damage the school he spent his life building, just to stop me from improving it. He doesn't see improvement. He sees desecration. Everything you've done attacks the foundation of his worldview, the belief that people like him deserve to be on top by virtue of birth. Then we need to change the conversation." Daniel stopped pacing, an idea crystallizing. The lawsuit is about procedure. We need to make it about substance. How? By demonstrating results so undeniable that no one can argue against them. The board meeting isn't just a procedural vote. It's an opportunity to show everyone what Ashford can become when excellence is the only standard. They worked through the night, compiling data, preparing presentations, reaching out to every scholarship student and supportive faculty member. The goal was simple: transform a defensive legal battle into an offensive demonstration of everything the new Ashford represented. The morning of the board meeting dawned grey and cold, a spring storm threatening on the horizon. Daniel arrived early, finding the parking lot already filling with vehicles he didn't recognize, Crawford's allies, no doubt, summoned to witness what they expected would be a triumphant restoration of the old order. The meeting room was the same library where his acquisition had been approved, but the atmosphere was entirely different. Hostile faces lined the walls. A legal team occupied one corner, documents spread before them like weapons. And at the head of the table, in a wheelchair that seemed throne-like in its positioning, sat William Crawford, frail in body but burning with vindictive energy. Mr. Reyes. Crawford's slurred voice cut through the murmur of conversation. I hope you've prepared yourself for reality. This farce ends today. I'm prepared for truth. Daniel took his seat at the opposite end of the table. Whether you recognize it as such remains to be seen. The meeting proceeded through formal motions, legal arguments, and procedural objections. Crawford's lawyers presented their case with practiced precision, casting doubt on every aspect of Daniel's acquisition and reform agenda. The board members, who had remained neutral, shifted uncomfortably, clearly influenced by the relentless pressure. When Daniel finally rose to speak, the room was thick with anticipation of his defeat. Everything you've heard today, he began, his voice carrying quiet authority, focuses on process, on paperwork and procedures and legal technicalities, but I want to talk about something more important. I want to talk about people. He nodded to Victoria, who opened the library doors. Through them walked 18 people, men and women of various ages, dressed professionally, carrying themselves with unmistakable confidence. These are former Ashford Scholarship students, Daniel continued as they filed into the room. Students who were expelled or forced out over the past 2 decades due to policies that prioritized wealth over merit. Policies that I experienced personally 12 years ago. A murmur rippled through the assembled audience. Even Crawford's lawyers seemed momentarily uncertain. Dr. Maria Gonzalez, expelled junior year for inability to pay supplemental fees, now the head of cardiothoracic surgery at Massachusetts General. Daniel gestured to a woman who stood with the quiet confidence of someone who saved lives for a living. James Wu, scholarship revoked senior year due to community fit concerns, currently the youngest partner at Sullivan and Cromwell. He introduced each person in turn, reciting accomplishments that represented the highest levels of professional success. Each name was another indictment of the system. Crawford had built, another proof of the talent that had been discarded. These people succeeded despite Ashford, not because of it. Imagine what they might have achieved with support instead of abandonment. Imagine what the students currently in this school could achieve if excellence were the only standard that mattered. Emotional manipulation, Crawford's lead attorney interjected. None of this addresses the legal substance of our complaint. You're right, it doesn't. Daniel turned to face the board directly. The legal substance of your complaint is designed to restore a system that wasted human potential and disguised discrimination as tradition. I could fight that complaint in court for years. I could win eventually, after exhausting resources that should be spent on students. He pulled a document from his briefcase. Instead, I'm offering an alternative. This is my resignation as chairman of Ashford's board, effective immediately upon the creation of an independent foundation to oversee the scholarship program. The foundation will be funded in perpetuity, governed by the alumni in this room, and completely insulated from future administrative interference. Shocked silence filled the library. I didn't come here for power, Daniel continued. I came here to keep a promise and to prove that institutions can be better than the people who build them. If my presence is an obstacle to that goal, I'm willing to step aside. What I'm not willing to do is abandon. The students who finally have the chance I was denied. Crawford's face contorted with confusion. This wasn't the confrontation he had orchestrated. His entire strategy depended on Daniel fighting to maintain control, a fight that would exhaust resources and generate bad publicity. Voluntary withdrawal undermined everything. You would give up everything you've built here? Everything I've built here was never for me. Daniel looked at Victoria, who watched him with an expression that blended pride and love. It was for the boy who walked out through those gates 12 years ago with nothing but his mother and a promise. It was for every student who deserved better than this institution was willing to give. The board chairman, Harrison, cleared his throat. If the Scholarship Foundation is established as described, the legal complaint becomes moot. Mr. Crawford, would your consortium withdraw their challenge? Crawford's lawyers whispered urgently to their client, clearly advising him to accept victory, or what they could frame as victory. Daniel's resignation could be presented as an admission of wrongdoing, a retreat in the face of legitimate opposition. But Crawford, in that moment, revealed the true nature of his character. His eyes met Daniel's across the length of the table, and what Daniel saw there wasn't satisfaction or triumph. It was fury, the particular rage of a man who had defined himself by opposition, who needed an enemy to feel powerful, who couldn't accept a resolution that denied him the climax of battle. No, Crawford's voice cut through his lawyer's protests. This isn't about the money or the foundation. This is about a scholarship boy who forgot his place. I want him removed completely. I want his name erased from every document, his influence purged from every policy, his— Father, stop! Victoria's voice rang out, steady and strong. This ends now. She stood and walked the length of the table until she stood beside Daniel, her hand finding his in a gesture of unmistakable solidarity. I've watched you destroy things my entire life, she continued, addressing her father with the courage of someone who had finally found her voice. Destroy students who didn't fit your standards. Destroy teachers who challenged your assumptions. Destroy relationships that didn't serve your ambitions. I let you do it because I was afraid of losing your approval, afraid of disappointing you, afraid of becoming an enemy instead of a daughter. Crawford's face had gone pale. Victoria, I'm not afraid anymore. Daniel showed me that fear is a choice, and I'm choosing differently. She turned to address the board. I'm withdrawing from my position as acting headmistress. But before I go, I want to say something to everyone in this room. She looked at the former scholarship students lined against the wall, at the board members who had spent years serving Crawford's vision, at the lawyers who made their living protecting privilege. This school could be something extraordinary. It could be the place it always claimed to be, on a beacon of excellence, a community of scholars, an institution that transforms lives. But only if we're brave enough to change, only if we're willing to admit that tradition isn't always wisdom, and that the people we excluded might have been exactly who we needed. Victoria took a deep breath. I'm stepping aside because my name carries the weight of everything my father built. But I'm asking you and all of you to build something better. Accept Daniel's proposal. Create the foundation. Let this be a turning point instead of another failure to do what's right. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. Then Harrison spoke. I move to accept Mr. Reyes's proposal and establish the Independent Scholarship Foundation as described. All in favor. Hands rose around the table, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. Even board members who had seemed sympathetic to Crawford's position found themselves voting in favor, swayed by Victoria's words and the undeniable evidence of what exclusion had cost. When the final count was tallied, the motion passed overwhelmingly. Crawford sat in his wheelchair, watching everything he had built transform into something he didn't recognize. For a moment, Daniel almost felt sympathy for him, the particular grief of a man who had lived long enough to see his life's work judged and found wanting. Then he remembered his mother waiting at the service entrance, her housekeeping uniform still bearing the crest of the institution that was about to discard her. He remembered walking away in the rain, promising to return, not knowing if the promise was possible to keep. Sympathy evaporated. Justice remained. The gardens of Ashford Preparatory Academy had never looked more beautiful than they did on the afternoon of the Foundation's official launch, 3 months after the board meeting that had changed everything. Summer had arrived in full force, painting the grounds in shades of green and gold, filling the air with the scent of flowers that Daniel remembered from his years as a student. The ceremony was small by design, no media circus, no celebrity donors, no political grandstanding. Just the 18 alumni who had testified at the board meeting, the current scholarship students, the faculty members who had supported the changes, and the people who mattered most. Maria Reyes sat in the front row, wearing a dress that Daniel had bought for her over her protests about unnecessary extravagance. She had spent the morning crying, though she insisted the tears were about allergies rather than pride. Now she watched her son take the stage with an expression that needed no words to interpret. 20 years ago, Daniel began, addressing the gathered assembly, a woman with nothing but hope and determination brought her son to this country. She believed that hard work and education could overcome any obstacle, that America would reward those who gave their best. She was wrong about a lot of things, wrong about the systems that protect privilege, wrong about the people who guard their advantages with cruelty and exclusion. But she was right about the fundamental truth, that potential exists everywhere, and that recognizing it is a moral obligation. He paused, finding his mother's eyes in the crowd. This foundation exists because of her, because of every meal she skipped, so I could eat, because of every humiliation she endured so I could have opportunities, because of every night she worked while I studied, believing that her sacrifice would someday matter. Daniel's voice caught slightly, but he pressed on. Mama, this is for you. Everything I've built, everything I'll ever build, it starts with you. Maria was openly crying now, and she wasn't alone. Even Victoria, standing at the edge of the stage, wiped tears from her cheeks. The Reyes Foundation will provide full scholarships to students from any background who demonstrate academic excellence and potential. But more than that, it will provide support, mentorship, resources, community, to ensure that no student ever feels alone in their pursuit of education. Daniel looked at the current scholarship students' young faces bright with possibility. You are the first generation of a new tradition, a tradition that says where you come from matters less than where you're going, a tradition that measures worth by character and achievement rather than inheritance and connection. He stepped back from the podium, and Victoria took his place. When I was 18 years old, she said, her voice steady, I promised someone that I would wait for him. I didn't fully understand what I was promising, the years of uncertainty, the doubt, the moments when waiting felt like foolishness. But I've learned something since then. I've learned that the most important promises aren't about time or distance. They're about choosing to believe in something better, even when that belief costs you. She turned to look at Daniel, and the love in her expression was unmistakable. Daniel Reyes kept his promise. He came back, not for revenge, but for transformation. He could have destroyed this school that had wronged him. Instead, he chose to rebuild it. That's the kind of person he is. That's the kind of love he offers, demanding, challenging, but ultimately redemptive. Victoria pulled something from her pocket, a small velvet box that made Daniel's breath catch. I know it's traditional for the man to do this part, she said with a smile, but we've never been traditional. Daniel Reyes, will you marry me? The gathered assembly erupted in surprised laughter and applause. Daniel stood frozen for a moment. The carefully controlled CEO suddenly transformed back into the nervous teenager who had fallen in love with the headmaster's daughter in a chemistry lab. Then he was moving forward, taking the box from Victoria's hands, opening it to reveal a simple gold band that matched the ring he had been carrying in his own pocket for weeks. I was going to ask you tonight, he managed. I know. Your mother told me. Victoria grinned. I wanted to get there first. Then yes. Daniel pulled her into his arms, ignoring the cheers of the crowd. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They kissed on the stage of the academy that had once expelled him, in front of the mother who had sacrificed everything, surrounded by students whose lives would be transformed by a foundation built on love and determination. The moment was imperfect, slightly chaotic, definitely unplanned, wonderfully human. It was exactly right. If you've watched this far, it's because you liked this story. Leave a comment saying, "I've watched this far," so I can get to know you and see who really enjoys the stories here on the channel. Later that evening, after the ceremony had ended and the guests had departed, Daniel walked the campus grounds alone. The summer twilight painted everything in shades of amber and rose, and the paths he had once traveled as a student felt somehow different beneath his feet. Not smaller, as childhood places often seem when revisited, but more fully realized, more honest about what they had been and what they could become. He found himself standing before the service entrance where his mother had waited that rainy night 12 years ago. The door looked the same, plain utilitarian, designed for people who were meant to be invisible. But now it stood open, welcoming rather than shameful, just another entrance to an institution that no longer distinguished between those who belonged and those who served. "I wondered if I'd find you here." Victoria's voice came from behind him, soft in the gathering dusk. "Just remembering." Daniel reached for her hand as she came to stand beside him. "This is where it started, where I made the promise. And now? Now, I'm wondering what comes next. The foundation is established, the school is transformed, my mother is taken care of. You've proposed to me in front of everyone I respect." He smiled slightly. "What do I do with the rest of my life?" "You could start by planning a wedding. That's not exactly a life's purpose. Then how about raising children who never have to wonder whether they're good enough, building more foundations, reaching more students, proving over and over that what happened to you doesn't have to happen to anyone else?" Victoria squeezed his hand. "Or you could just learn to enjoy what you've built. That's allowed, you know. Successful people are permitted to be happy." Daniel turned to face her, this woman who had waited 12 years for him to become worthy of her, who had defied her father and sacrificed her inheritance and chosen love over privilege. "I think I'd like that," he said quietly. "Learning to be happy. I've spent so long fighting that I forgot happiness was even an option. Then let me teach you." Victoria stepped closer, her arms wrapping around his waist. "Let me show you that the struggle was worth it, that what we built together means something, that every sacrifice led us here." Above them, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, points of light that had witnessed countless human dramas, countless promises made and broken, countless loves that had flourished or faded. But tonight, they witnessed something worth seeing. Two people who had overcome everything that should have kept them apart, standing together in the place where their story had begun. "I love you," Daniel said. "I know." Victoria smiled against his chest. "I've known for 12 years. "Then why did you wait so long to ask me to marry you?" "I was waiting for you to become the person you needed to be, and you were waiting for me to become the person I needed to be. And now we're both here, and we're both ready. And the waiting is finally over." Daniel kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her body against his. For years, he had defined himself by what he lacked: money, status, family connections, the arbitrary advantages that determined success in an unjust world. Now he understood that those lacks had been gifts in disguise, challenges that had forged him into someone capable of transformation. Not just his own transformation, but the transformation of institutions and systems, and possibilities. "Let's go home," Victoria said. "Where's home?" "Wherever we decide it is. That's the advantage of building your own life. You get to choose." They walked away from the service entrance hand in hand, through gardens that had been designed for the privileged, but now belonged to everyone who earned the right to walk them. Behind them, the buildings of Ashford Preparatory Academy stood in silhouette against the evening sky. Monuments to a changing world, testaments to what was possible when someone refused to accept that their circumstances defined their destiny. The story that had begun with expulsion ended with transformation. The promise that had seemed impossible was finally, completely kept. Now subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because stories like this one remind us that determination can overcome any obstacle. Hit that like button if this story moved you, and share it with someone who needs to hear that their struggles are not the end of their story. They're the beginning. Because they are. Because every struggle is. Because the boy who was expelled for being poor returned as something no one expected, and in doing so, proved that the ending isn't written until you decide to write it yourself.